In this video, we're going to talk about chemical equations. But first, let's go ahead and define a chemical reaction. We've done several in the lab. A chemical reaction is when one or more substances are changed into one or more different substances. The original substances are called the reactants, and the resulting substances are called the products. So, let's go ahead and define chemical equations. Okay. A chemical equation is going to represent what was going on in that chemical reaction. We're going to be using symbols and formulas, and we're going to be able to show the relative amounts of our reactants and products. So, this looks a little messy, but we'll see what's all going on here. Our reactants are silver nitrate and copper. And the products are silver and copper 2 nitrate. Now, the arrow separates the reactants from the products. And the word that we usually say in chemistry is yields. A lot of people think of our yield sign as an equal sign because what's over here has to equal what's over here. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about balancing equations. So to the left side are reactants, to the right side of that arrow are our products. Now, out front, notice the number here. They're in brown. Those are called coefficients. They're the relative amounts. So we're going to have a 2 to 1. If there's nothing in front of it, it's understood to be a 1. So 2 parts silver nitrate to 1 part copper. We're really talking about moles. So 2 moles of silver nitrate will react for every mole of copper. And it will form 2 moles of silver and 1 mole of copper 2 nitrate. So these are coefficients, and you're going to learn how to put these coefficients into a chemical reaction to balance it. The numbers down here are subscripts, and you cannot change those when you're writing an equation. You learned how to write silver nitrate, it's AgNO3, so you're not going to ever change your subscripts. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some symbols that are used in chemical equations, because there's lots of stuff showing up in an equation, and so let's define what all of that stuff is. All right, you may have seen an S next to the silver and the copper, and it's in parentheses and it's lowercase. That stands for solid. So that meant that the silver was in the solid state and the copper was in the solid state. And L is represents a liquid state, and G represents a gas state. Well, the one that may be a little confusing is AQ, and that means that it is aqueous, and all that means is that it was dissolved in water. All right, let's look at another symbol. Here we have 2 hydrogen peroxides, and it's a liquid. So that's my coefficient. Yields 2 waters that are liquids, and an oxygen that's a gas. But there's something written over our yield sign, and that's manganese dioxide. When you see something written over the arrow like that, it means that, well, it's not part of the balanced equation, but in this case, it was a catalyst that was added, and a catalyst speeds up a reaction. It's like the enzyme in biology. And so it's not part of our balanced equation, but it did take part in the mechanism of this reaction that we'll talk about much later this year, and that it sped up the reaction. All right, and then we have one more symbol I want you guys to look at. Sometimes when you put something over the arrow, you may see a little triangle. So here we've got potassium chlorate as our reactant. Our products are oxygen and potassium chloride. Notice this time I didn't write the states of matter down here. So sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. All right, the triangle over the arrow represents heat. That means in order for this reaction to go, you needed to heat it up so that you could see the products. Again, our coefficients are 2, 3, and 2. The reactant, potassium chloride, would have been a solid. Oxygen is a gas, and then this potassium chloride would have been a solid as well. All right, Let's talk about the chemical reactions that you did in the lab. We started with copper 2 chloride, and remember, it was a solution. It was that nice, pretty blue solution. That's aqueous. That means the copper 2 chloride was dissolved in water. We reacted it with a solution of sodium hydroxide. And the products that you made were copper 2 hydroxide and sodium chloride. Now, you should have observed a pretty light blue precipitate. And so that is our solid that formed in that chemical reaction. And the sodium chloride is still soluble in water, so it's still aqueous. All right, over here we put some acetic acid. This was reaction 2. It was aqueous, it was in water. We reacted it with some sodium carbonate that was also aqueous. And we formed sodium acetate that was still in solution, but we generated a gas. You should have seen those bubbles. And the gas that we generated was carbon dioxide, and we also produced some liquid water. Well, I hope that's a good introduction to chemical equations because we're going to be seeing a lot of these.